You know one of the most fun things about doing arguments? Messing with people. Back when we talked about cognitive biases, I mentioned that our brains don't always think in a completely rational way. It'd be nice if they did, but they don't. But that's not the only times you find rationality failing us, because a lot of people will go out of their way to try to mess with you by screwing up logic. Gotta know how to knock these people down, right? The absolute best thing about logic is that when you apply it right, you can end up learning an awful lot that you wouldn't be able to learn otherwise. And I think about this a lot because I don't think people get enough training in logic, and looking out in the world, I don't think enough people use it. But while I was doing my last batch of grading, I had a little bit of a logical epiphany. You see, I was listening to some music, and I was listening to the new Lady Gaga album. I like it a lot. But in between papers, I would look up interesting stuff to keep my mind from imploding. And I found out that Lady Gaga, great album. I found out that Lady Gaga actually has fibromyalgia, which is really interesting for me because my mom has fibromyalgia. So you know what this means logically, right? It means that Lady Gaga must be my mom. What? You don't believe me? Well, let's try another use of logic. At this point, if you don't believe in global warming, you're probably, how can I say this without being too insulting? Not paying attention? And I know that mankind has been looking to try to figure out what we're going to do about global warming, but I've figured out the answer using nothing but logic. We need to have more pirates. Because, look at the chart. In 1860, we had 45,000 pirates. The global temperature was like 14.3 Celsius. Year 2000... there's only 17 pirates, and the global temperature is like 15.9. That's a significant raise. And the difference here? We have less pirates. So we get more pirates, we're going to have less global warming, right? It's logical, right? Unfortunately not. It would be wonderful if it was logical, but no. This is actually a good example of the false cause logical fallacy. It's just because one thing happens concurrently with another thing doesn't mean there's an actual relationship between them. Correlation does not mean causality. If I really wanted to pursue this line of thought, I could bring in a lot more evidence, and I could try to figure it out. And say I did that. But would this prove global warming? Probably a different fallacy there. Logical fallacies show up an awful lot in our culture. People don't think about how they're putting their thoughts together. And it leads to some really silly statements, and it leads to some real damage. You might have heard of the autism advocate Jenny McCarthy. Coincidentally enough, she got her start on an MTV show and then by working with Playboy an awful lot. Who, after her son had a vaccine and developed autism, she then started a mega crusade that tried to argue that vaccines caused autism. Well, if you look at the evidence, there's none of it. Everything that ties autism to vaccines was based off of one report, which every co-author except for one has distanced themselves from, and the journal it was published in has retracted it, and tons of errors in the study have been shown. There isn't a connection. But people just, hey, this happened and then this happened, so this must be the cause of this. It leads to a lot of interesting logical fallacies, and it tends to lead to a lot of divisiveness as well. Logical fallacies affect us in other ways. I'm a part of a few poker games. At least I was before a deadly disease started coming around and causing everybody to never leave their houses. One of the things you notice in poker games, even among people who really should know better, and I've got a department poker game, so we're talking a bunch of people with higher degrees, is that people will still talk about their run of cards or their luck. I can't quit now. I know I've been losing all night, but I'm due. It's got to come back around someday, right? Well, statistics don't really work that way. In order for the statistics to bear a real relationship on reality, you have to have a very large sample, and that's not going to happen during one gaming session. People who go to casinos will work on the principle that, hey, this machine is due for a payout. Well, no, the odds are going to be the same no matter what. Just because you didn't win the last time doesn't mean you're going to win this time. Just because I've gotten crap hands for the last 20 hands doesn't mean that I'm going to get that royal flush this time, or even anything at all. But lots of people will make that argument, because the other way, I guess, requires more energy? I don't know. Another logical fallacy, which has had much realer effects, which has had much more tangible effects in our society, happened after 9/11. 9/11 was a big deal. It changed a lot about how Americans saw themselves and their place in the world. And our president at the time, George W. Bush, said, over time, it's going to be important for nations to know they will be held accountable for an activity. You're either with us or against us in the fight against terror. So if you're not going full support in our effort to hunt down the terrorists, you might as well be on their side. Now, this is very much a logical fallacy. It's the black or white fallacy. You're presented with two alternative states as if they're the only possibilities. Is the world really that binary? I have my doubts. And so do most people. But it does take a complex situation and frame it down to two simple choices. I guess being clearer is a virtue, but I don't think it's as good of a virtue as being accurate. Another logical fallacy, there are a lot of good reasons to be spiritual. And I'm not trying to mock anyone's spirituality, but when people say that I know the Bible is true because the Bible says it's true, that doesn't really logically work all that well either. Circular argument, you're restating your point instead of actually proving it. Logical fallacies, when you're going to see a lot of them, and there's value to knowing them because you're going to be able to see where people's arguments go wrong. This is going to help you in figuring out who to trust, but it's also going to be the case that knowing logical fallacies, you'll be able to see where your own thinking isn't necessarily on point. And that's perhaps more important. I've mentioned once or twice that I'm a musician. And I've mentioned once or twice that I'm probably not all that successful of one when it comes down to it. My brain works the way where I tend to overthink a lot of things, and the musician thing is one of them. Musicians who have lots of skill, there are a lot of them who are very, very famous. Then there's me, who has more than once in his life played to empty rooms. I think every musician probably has, but after I play a night where there's not very many people in the audience, I have to think about the relationship between these things. Is the superstar famous because they're awesome? If that's the case, and I know I'm not famous, that must mean I suck. Now, it's a logical fallacy, though, because I'm equating talent to success, and if you have talent, you will be a success. I'm not saying that I am super ultra talented, but there's other things at work. And when I fall into this simplistic point of view, it tends to make me question myself in ways where I shouldn't, where I should actually just be thinking about stuff a bit better. And that's what logical fallacies will teach you, that thinking about things is going to be better than faking it. I mentioned logical fallacies as somebody messing with your logic, and that's not really entirely true. One of the reasons I find myself teaching logic a lot as part of my writing courses is because people don't get any training in it. I know I never did in high school, and every time I've asked my students, has anyone ever really talked to you about logic? Maybe only a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. So being aware that it's not just about throwing sources and going, see there, that there's a method behind it is something I think can improve you no matter what kind of writing you're trying to do. So I hope you found this valuable. See you next video.